I really appreciate being here, and the first thing I want to do is start by talking about the difference between diet and nutrition. So often, I have several degrees in nutrition, and people still think I'm a dietitian, and I want to make sure that people here really understand the difference. Diet is what you eat. It is the stuff you put in your mouth to make you not feel full. Lard, beer, Twinkies, soda pop, that counts as diet. It actually provides very little nutrition. Nutrition is the study of what humans need to obtain from our environment in order to survive and thrive. That which nourishes us is nutrition. So we're used to thinking in terms of fats, proteins, carbohydrates. I'm here to really get us away from that level of thinking and talk more about micronutrients, vitamins A, B, C, D, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and really move away from this idea of 30-30, 40 sort of ratios and more into quality, not quantity. We have this huge epidemic of malnutrition with overconsumption. And so I really want to reframe how we think about this. Nutrition is not just food. Food can be an excellent source of nutrition. It is certainly not the only source of nutrition. Sunlight is a perfect example. Just like Silke said earlier this morning, these are things that we have evolved to need. Gravity. Astronauts go up in space and their bones start to fall apart. We have evolved to need gravity. Gravity is a nutrient. Social connection is a nutrient. These are things that in their absence, we start to suffer and fall apart. When we put them back in, health is restored. And so the study of nutrition, and what I'm asking all of you to do, is really start to think about, what do I need to nourish myself? Am I putting those ingredients in, and how to make the pieces work? So we have a rapidly changing paradigm of nutrition, of Parkinson's disease right now. 10 years ago, we said this was a motor disease of the substantia nigra. We don't say that anymore. Really, we are all talking about this as a systemic disease. It probably starts in the gut. It might have a prion-like spread 10, 20 years prior to your first motor symptom. And we now know that it is motor, non-motor, and cognitive. And so the entire community is taking a really open-minded approach to restating what this disease is actually all about. I don't expect you to be able to see all of the dots on this slide, but it's really important for setting the stage as to how I got here and what I'm doing here. So this is an article that came out, and this summarizes all of the available medications available to people with Parkinson's disease. And this bottom half, from this line below, are all of the available therapies. As you can see, almost everything that's available is in the dopaminergic column. We have a couple non-motor therapies like amantadine, but there isn't much available that's non-dopaminergic. The real point of this slide are the colors. You can't see it, but the blue dots signify disease-modifying therapies, right? And so you can see that most of this stuff is purple. These are the dopaminergic meds. The blue dots are the things that actually slow the rate of your progression. We're really good at hiding your symptoms while your disease progresses, but we are really bad at changing the rate of disease progression. So the blue dots represent disease-modifying therapies, and right now there are no blue dots. We are celebrating the 200th year anniversary next year, and we don't have a single therapy other than exercise that has been shown to slow disease progression. So Azilect or Sagiline actually has a half of a blue dot, as we talked about earlier today. There really is some evidence that this probably does slow disease a little bit. And so I came to this saying, I want a blue dot. I want you to have a blue dot. And so that's what I'm really looking to do. I also really like putting this in perspective from public health. I study public health. And the day before I decided I wanted to commit my career to Parkinson's disease, a statistician taught me that I'm not even talking about changing the slope, but if we could just delay the onset of Parkinson's disease by 5 years, we would cut in half the number of people who have Parkinson's. Right? Those are huge numbers. That's not even including changing the slope. That's just a 5-year delay in onset. Cuts in half the number of people who have it. The next day, I learned that people who drink 3 cups of green tea per day delay onset of symptoms by 7.7 years. And that was when I realized we have data that we are not using. How many of you earlier in your lives were ever told, hey, you should drink some green tea so you don't someday get Parkinson's? I mean, we're not using the data we have to prevent the disease. And then what happens is you get this diagnosis and you go into your doc and you say, hey, should I start chugging green tea? And the correct answer is we have no data that says once you've already been diagnosed that that does diddly squat, right? And so we're stuck with all this data we don't use and useless data to people who are affected by the disease and no way to tell who's going to get the disease. So we do have data about who is at risk of developing Parkinson's disease. This is a Harvard study that shows that people who eat a prudent diet, high in fruits and veggies and beans, coffee, tea, whole grains, fish, and poultry, people who avoid cream, red meat, and pork are significantly less likely to be diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So what does this mean for people who already have the disease? In 200 years, 199 years, nobody has ever asked. So what I set out to do is ask a very obvious question. What is the difference between those of you with fast progressing disease and those of you with the slow progressing disease? I mean, it's a really, really simple question that nobody has asked. I mean, you all know people who are progressing faster or slower than you. What's the difference? Why? It is not luck of the draw. So this is the scale we're looking at, and what we're looking at are, they're called the positive deviants. What we want to know are who are the people, same diagnosis, just like you, but they are 15, 20 years out and still saying, I have very few symptoms and my quality of life is excellent. Who are they and what are they doing different? So the first thing we needed to do is design an outcome measure. This is an internet-based survey. We wanted to get thousands of people from around the world, and so obviously we can't do physical exams on everyone via internet, and so we needed to develop a new outcome measure. So what we did is we developed this outcome measure called the ProPD. You can go to the website, it's www.propd.org, and take it yourself, get your score, and find out how you compare to other people 3 years out, 13 years out. And it's a nice way to just kind of, it's a report card. And so we asked the question, on average over the last 7 days, how severe have any of these symptoms been? And so people go through, it takes about 5 minutes, and if it's been severe, you click to the right. If you don't have the symptom at all, you click to the left, and we add up all the numbers and you get a score. So the first thing that we've got 1,090 people so far. So anyone in the study already? Thank you. So to those of you who are already participating, thank you. You are teaching us. This is what we've learned with the first 1,000 people. First thing we've learned is that the scale works really well. It correlates with mental health, physical health, overall quality of life. It correlates with all of the existing validated Parkinson's measures that we compared it against. You can see these lines correlate nicely. We also learned that the disease that you have is not necessarily the ones that doesn't reflect the same symptoms that the doctors are trying to treat. If you ask a physician, what are the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, you're going to hear rigidity, tremor, slowness, bradykinesia type stuff. What we learned here that motor symptoms are really leading, non-motor symptoms are really much more prevalent and affecting your quality of life more than I think we physicians are paying attention to. More than 90% of you are saying that the worst symptoms you have are handwriting and fatigue. 80% saying slowness, daytime sleepiness, muscle cramps, memory impairment, impaired balance, loss of smell, tremor, walking, urinary and sexual dysfunction. And I'm just going to say, I don't think that's how most neurologists describe Parkinson's. The things in red are the non-motor symptoms, and I like this idea of evolving the disease that we're trying to treat and really letting you tell us what we need to focus on. The next thing we learned is that a lot of you are already using complementary and alternative therapies. This is not a study that is only for people using complementary and alternative therapies, but what we really wanted to do is look at modifiable lifestyle variables, things that you could change. And so we saw that a lot of you are using supplements. 60% of people are already taking vitamin D, almost 40% taking fish oil, B12, multivitamins, vitamin C, calcium, turmeric, coconut oil, and melatonin are the 10 most common supplements being used. Before I get into giving you the answers about what works and what doesn't, I want to give you a little tutorial about how to interpret the data. I'm going to give you some numbers associated with veggie consumption or fruit consumption. This is not per serving of fruit. This is as we move from dot to dot. So if you go from never eating a half a cup of fruit, 2 dots down, to 1 per month, you actually get to take your 58 points and double it. Two bumps down means double that number that you see. So I just want to make sure that as I get into the statistics of what I'm about to show you, that you know that it's not quite per serving, but close. Okay, so this is what we've learned. This is what we've wanted to know for 200 years. Doc, is there anything I can do to slow my disease, right? And so I've color-coded this. The stuff in green are on the top of the list. You all have a copy of this. Is what has been shown to statistically significantly is associated with a slower rate of disease progression. The stuff in red at the bottom is associated with a faster rate of progression. I'm going to go through it. I'm just going to say a word about dairy. There have been 6 studies that have been done so far, prospective longitudinal studies where we follow people over the course of their life and ask, is there anything people are eating that is increasing or decreasing the risk of developing Parkinson's? 6 studies have found dairy to be linked with developing Parkinson's. So that was actually one of the things that led me to do this study, was the number of people asking, so do you want me to give up dairy? And so according to these data, dairy is not associated with a faster rate of progression. I will tell you from my clinical experience, it is absolutely associated with constipation, but it is not associated with a faster rate of Parkinson's progression. So let's go through what the data individually. This is a Mediterranean diet. You look at the things that are protective: veggies, fruits, grains, beans, fish, wine, olive oil. This we've known for a long time. The Mediterranean diet is associated with decreased risk of cancer and Alzheimer's and autoimmune disease and obesity and type 2 diabetes. I mean, these are side effects of the Mediterranean diet, is you don't get those other things. So we have good data already in Alzheimer's saying that people who eat this diet do fare better over time, and now we have data in Parkinson's saying the same thing. Eating this diet really does change the course of the disease. You know, before I go on, I just want to say, everyone sees that list and they think to themselves, I eat all that stuff. What I would encourage you to do is look at that list and spend a little time with it and answer for yourself, what percentage of your diet is comprised of that list? And when I ask the question that way, I get anything between 5 and 90%. So what I'm encouraging you to do is figure out how you can stack the deck in your favor. If you are used to eating pastries for breakfast and that's what fills you up, how can you replace that with some soft-boiled eggs and some fruit? Every meal is an opportunity to increase that protective currency. So what about the things that are associated with a faster rate of progression? Fried foods. So we know that fried foods cause something called lipid peroxidation. And when you heat fats up too high, you manipulate the shape of the fatty acid, and that causes something called lipid peroxidation. A chemical goes up in your bloodstream called acrolein. You can measure it after an order of French fries. That leads to protein misfolding, right? I think a lot of you are trying really hard to limit the protein misfolding. And I don't know for a fact that this is why fried foods are associated, but these are some ideas as to, there is really good data saying that acrolein and lipid peroxides lead to protein misfolding. So I'm just throwing out some potential scientific justification for what it is that we're seeing. And let me just say before I go into the scientific justification, I think it's really important to take a minute to say 3 million people died of scurvy before we realized that scurvy could be treated with limes, right? For 200 years, as long as we have known about Parkinson's, we treated scurvy with limes and then discovered the vitamin C molecule. We are in this state, this very science-based, molecular-based way of practicing medicine, where I couldn't even get funded to do a Lyme and scurvy study until I had that molecule in place. I mean, what we're doing right now is when the scientist has a really good understanding of the molecular basis, then maybe they might get the grant funded to give Lymes that might treat scurvy. And as long as we wait for us to figure out the brain to move forward, you're all going to suffer. What I am trying to do here and what I'm encouraging you to do, and I'm a scientist, I like the molecular explanations of this stuff, But at some point, it doesn't matter. If limes work, they work. Just use them, right? Let someone figure it out later. That's great, 200 years from now. Right now, let's just say, hey, people who are fast progressing are eating a lot of fried foods. Maybe we shouldn't be eating fried foods, right? So I might be wrong about these mechanisms, but sometimes it's a little extra motivating to have some mechanistic understanding as to why this may be. The beef, canned fruits and veggies, and diet soda. At first, I thought that these were measures of surrogates for income, that poor people were eating more canned fruits and vegetables. But in our data, what has happened is we've adjusted. For all practical purposes, we are comparing two 56-year-old women in the same income bracket who have both been diagnosed 6 years ago, who are only affected on the one side of their body. And so I have statistically taken into account a lot of those things. I'm going to talk about beef in a minute when I talk about iron, but I'll just say I think that the issue with beef is probably the high iron content. The canned fruits and vegetables is probably either the aluminum cans or in the lining is bisphenol A, which has been shown to have some neurotoxic properties. I don't know which. People have been asking questions about canned beans. I don't know. Right now, we just asked about, I was trying to figure out whether frozen, fresh, or canned made a difference, and I was really actually surprised to learn that canned fruits and vegetables are actually accelerating the disease progression. That was a surprise to me, and when I first saw these data, I thought to myself, oh, I don't eat canned fruits and veggies. And then as you start becoming a little more aware, you realize a lot of the things I cook with tomato sauce are actually from cans. I like pineapple juice, tends to come in a can. And so as you start realizing, every time you eat out, I'm sure half the stuff in the restaurant is canned. And so I do think that as you start to be aware of these things, you realize you're probably exposed to more than you realize. Diet soda. There's some really neat research in the diabetes world coming out saying that some of these artificial sweeteners like aspartame really mess up the bugs that are growing in your gut. We know that that is now associated with Parkinson's disease. So the mechanism might be through manipulation of the intestinal microbiome. And there's also this thing called neuronal hyperexcitability. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but this is I just wanted to show this comes from the conventional medical journals, but this is a study called Effects of Aspartame Metabolites on Astrocytes and Neurons. And what it basically says is aspartame breaks down and prevents dopamine from entering the cells, and cells eventually die. Neurons and astrocytes die. And so this is data that is available to you and your physicians in the published medical journals, and I'm saying that we're not using it as much as we should be. These artificial sweeteners don't only come in diet sodas. I don't know what you have here, but in the United States, I'd say that about 95% of our chewing gum has aspartame in it. And so I would just encourage you to perk up a little bit and pay attention, read the ingredients for what you're putting in your mouth. Exercise is really important, and I do consider it part of the field of nutrition. It is something that we must engage in our environment in order to have health. This is really neat because everyone knows exercise is good. People go for a stroll, think they got their exercise. These data say that the first 1 to 2 days a week of exercise actually don't make that much of a difference at all. You can see the score starts to go down after day 3, and it goes down in a dose-dependent manner after that, so that people exercising 3 days a week are about 177 points lower than people who don't exercise at all. Just to put this in context, so it's people who do, the question we ask is, on how many of the last 7 days did you do at least 30 minutes of exercise, right? And for people who said all 7, they were on average about 400 points lower than people who don't exercise at all. So statistically, what does that mean? At 10 years into their diagnosis, the average person has a pro-PD score of about 1,000. At diagnosis, the average person has a pro-PD score of 538. So statistically speaking, somebody who's doing 7 days a week of exercise could rightfully say, look themselves in the mirror at year 10 and say, I feel better today. I have fewer symptoms and a higher quality of life than I did the day I was diagnosed. How many of you are exercising 30 minutes 7 days a week? How many of you are going to exercise 30 minutes, 7 days a week? I mean, these are things you can do. It's 30 minutes, and people get in the habit of saying, I can't afford it. And trust me, you can't afford the consequences of not. Flip it. You need that motivation. Supplements and pharmaceuticals. Before I go on, I'm just going to say, too, we did ask, is one form of exercise better than another? That's a question we get a lot, and so I'll just answer it now. Running and yoga were associated with the greatest decrease in symptom score. And when we ask the question in a different way, we ask everybody in the survey, in the last 6 months, has your disease been stable, reversed, or progressed? People who do yoga were almost 3 times more likely to say, my disease has reversed in the last 3 months. So if I have to choose one form of exercise, it's yoga. The other thing I think is really neat about yoga is this field of neuroplasticity emerges, is there's a lot of diversity, and there's this idea that you wrap yourself into a pretzel and your brain says, if he's going to pull stuff like that, I better sprout some new neurons. And so there is something about leaving your comfort zone and putting your body in awkward, uncomfortable positions as a way of adding fertilizer to the neurological system. The other thing I think is really important about yoga is the emphasis on mindfulness. We're going to hear talk about that later, but that really, truly contributes to your health and well-being. And balance exercises. There's really neat data that says when you improve your balance, your anxiety improves. So moving on to pills, supplements, and pharmaceuticals. I'm not here to talk about pharmaceuticals, but I will say that Rasagiline, Azilect, did also in our study come up as having some disease modification properties, and so I'm excited to see that. Glutathione and coenzyme Q10 were protective, and iron was associated with a faster rate of Parkinson's progression. I'm just going to say now, melatonin was also associated with a faster rate of Parkinson's progression, which scared me a little bit because there's a lot of really neat emerging data suggesting that melatonin has some neuroprotective properties. It's the strongest antioxidant that our body makes. And a lot of people are studying it as a potential neuroprotective strategy. So when I saw that people taking melatonin were having a faster rate of progression, I got really nervous that perhaps I was harming my patients by having them take melatonin. And what happened was once we adjusted for bad sleep, the association went away. It is not melatonin that is associated with a faster rate of progression, it is bad sleep. And there are other studies that support that as well. So what is glutathione? Glutathione is the most important antioxidant in the brain. It does all sorts of things to put out the free radical fire. The other thing that it does that is tremendously important is cell detoxification. We have known for 33 years now that the brains of people with Parkinson's are deficient in glutathione. We started doing autopsies on people in the early 80s, and we found that we know that with age, all mammals decrease their glutathione production. It's one of the reasons we think we might age, and it's one of the reasons we think that Parkinson's may be an age-related disease, is because the loss of glutathione renders you more susceptible. And so we started doing autopsies on people and realizing that even compared to age-matched counterparts, people with Parkinson's have an extra 40 to 60% deficiency of their brain of glutathione. So this really is like a scurvy. And so up here, these are just a whole bunch of review articles that have been done. Each one themselves covers 20 or 30 other articles, and they all conclude that glutathione deficiency is absolutely associated with Parkinson's disease progression. And this was the topic of my PhD thesis, was glutathione deficiency in Parkinson's disease. I just published a paper saying the lower your blood glutathione levels, the more severe your symptoms. And there are a lot of different strategies being researched right now, ways to boost brain glutathione. I think we all agree that you have glutathione deficiency and that it's contributing to the problem. What nobody agrees on is how best to fortify you with glutathione and whether or not it's going to make a meaningful difference. And so that's what we're all trying to figure out. Some people are doing IV. I was under the impression oral did not work very well. These data taught me that perhaps they work better than we thought. My research is on intranasal glutathione. And so we're all trying to find the best way to get it in. But I think that there is a substantial body of literature right now that glutathione deficiency is contributing. And now we have data saying that it certainly affects outcomes. Coenzyme Q10s, many of you probably used to be on CoQ10 and quit it when the QE3 study failed. So coenzyme Q10 is another antioxidant, and the other thing it does is it is involved in helping all of your cells make energy. It's involved in mitochondrial health. And we know that the part of your mitochondria, the energy production part of your cells, that doesn't work well, part 1, is the part that needs CoQ10 the most. And so scientists 20 years ago had really good justification for saying, hey, let's try giving coenzyme Q10 to people with Parkinson's disease. They did it in petri dishes, it worked. They did it in animal models, it worked. They did it in a phase 1 study, and it worked. They showed that people taking a really high dose, 1,200 milligrams a day, were progressing about 40% slower than controls. And our National Institutes of Health invested a ton of money into a really huge phase 3 clinical study. Unfortunately, the study was pulled because it didn't look like it was working. So let me just comment. I think there are a couple of problems that we have with how we're designing studies. I published a study that showed that 35% of you, I can actually measure a coenzyme Q10 deficiency in your bloodstream. I think that it would have been a better study design. Instead of giving everyone with a diagnosis of Parkinson's CoQ10, we should have given it to the people who are CoQ10 deficient. I'm afraid we may have diluted our results by 2/3. That's one concern that I have. The other concern that I have is the way that we currently do disease modification trials right now, because we want to be really pure and clean. If we're going to spend a bunch of money to study X, we want to make sure it's X that's doing the work, that's helping, right? And so we only enroll people who have not yet started dopamine. And so imagine that you're on a boat that has 4 or 5 holes in it. Everyone agrees you have a dopamine deficiency and that your brain needs dopamine, right? We've already talked about that today at length. When we started giving people dopamine, people's life expectancy increased. We heard earlier this morning there is no good reason to delay dopamine. In fact, it may be harmful. And so what do we do when we want to do a disease modification study? We don't let you take dopamine. We continue to deprive your brain of this thing we all are telling you that you need. And so we don't plug that hole in the boat. We just plug the CoQ10 hole, and we say, it's sunk anyway, that doesn't work. And that's what we've done for all of our disease modification trials. And I think at some point you can only have so many failed trials on a phase 3 level that worked, and all the way up to phase 3, and we have to take a step back and say maybe we're doing the studies wrong. So iron. I think iron is a really big deal. I was actually surprised the data was sensitive enough to pick this up with only 1,000 people in it, and I was really surprised that many people were taking iron supplements. But as you know, Parkinson's is a full body disease. You feel the symptoms in the nigra, right, the substantia nigra, because that area is so vulnerable to attack. It is not it itself is not the problem. The free radicals, the environment is the problem. The reason the substantia nigra takes such a hit is because that's where dopamine production happens. And you can't make dopamine without iron. So in that little part of the brain, you've got a huge bucket of iron. And iron plus oxygen, what happens to your car? Right, that's oxidation. Iron is very, very prone to oxidation. And so because that part of the brain has so much iron, is one of probably the main reason why that part of the brain takes the hit. I find it really interesting. You know, men get more Parkinson's than women until menopause. And one of the ideas is that women getting rid of blood every month is actually decreasing the iron content and providing a little bit of protection. Social health is very much a nutrient. I find this very, very chill-provoking to learn that of all of the data that we have looked at so far, the single biggest predictor of Parkinson's progression is if people say true to the statement, I am lonely. I will also say I have a lot of friends, and those numbers don't correlate. There are a lot of people who have friends who still feel lonely. And so I want to really, really take this opportunity to stress that social connection is an essential part of your treatment. I used to, when I started practicing 10, 15, 20 years ago, I really thought support groups were a coping tool. I now realize that it's part of the medicine. You have to be engaged, and most importantly, you need people to expect you to be somewhere. You have to be needed. I don't care if it's a Parkinson's group. It's great if it is because you understand each other in a way that a non-Parkinson's person can't. But I don't care if it's your church. I have a patient who has no family. He's very, very lonely. And I gave him a big talking to a couple months ago, and I was thrilled to hear that he has started going to his neighborhood elementary school, and he goes 3 times a week and helps kids from an underserved area read. Kids who don't have a book in their house, this guy goes and he just helps them read. And every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the school and these kids expect him to be there. It's free, it's easy, it's close to his house, and it plugs him into society. I am overweight is also a predictor of progression. You get extra, your points go up. You get a higher Parkinson score for being overweight. This has nothing to do with aesthetics. I don't care what you look like in a bathing suit. This is about fat cells making inflammatory chemicals. Inflammation leads to degeneration, right? So these are things that you can do something about, and I encourage you to do that. Moving away from my study results, I just want to talk to you a little bit about what I do in my clinical practice. Let me just say, for those of you who don't know what a naturopathic physician is, it's a 4-year medical school program. There are 4 schools in the United States, 2 in Canada. Our first 2 years are the same as a DO, MD, any medical school. The last 2 years, where conventional docs do their dermatology rotations and their gynecology rotations and kind of choose their specialty, we take it a different direction and go way more eclectic. We study pharmaceutical drugs and minor surgery. We also do Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine and chiropractic adjustments and herbs and homeopathy and Ayurvedic stuff. And so it's much, much more eclectic. And I'm not an expert in all of those things, but just like a primary care physician is supposed to know just enough to point you in the right direction if need be, that's the same thing as what a naturopathic doc is. Think of all the emails you get from loving friends and family who want you to try a new A, B, or C. We have a medical degree in helping you sift through what might be legitimate and worth your time and money and what's not. I don't know what is the situation here in British Columbia, but in Washington State, I'm covered by insurance. I write prescriptions. If you were to eavesdrop on my practice, you'd see I function a lot more like a movement disorder doc than most. I only work with patients with Parkinson's, and that's all I've done for about 10 years now. When patients come to my office, I send them home with homework. Everyone has to watch a couple movies like Fed Up and Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. This movie is really important, and for those of you who haven't seen it, I cannot stress enough the importance of watching it. I have never, ever once asked a patient to do what he does, right? He comes to the US from Australia. He's a charming film producer. He's overweight and unhealthy, and he says, I'm coming to America. I'm not going to eat any of your food, and he goes on a 60-day juice fast. If I remember, I have, I think, 3 nutrition degrees, right? I've studied a lot of nutrition. I think I learned more watching this movie than I have in 20 years of college education. I did not know a human body could improve its health this much in 60 days. Before watching this movie, if I had not seen it, if he had not had a film crew following him around, I would not have believed that somebody could go from where he started to where he finished in 60 days. I did not know it was humanly possible. If for no other reason than to show all of you what is possible, it is worth the 2 hours to watch this movie. In my waiting room, everybody takes the Pro-PD. So when they come back to my office, I can, in a glance, see where the problem areas are. This prevents me from only addressing the symptoms I have an answer for, which we have a tendency to do. You come back and I can see that handwriting and drooling and sleep are your biggest problems, and it really forces me to be accountable for you. I want to treat you, not your disease. So everyone gets a Pro-PD. It also gives you a score, and it allows us to set goals. If you have a score of 1,000 today, we roll up our sleeves and figure out what can we change, what can we improve so that we can get you down to a 900 before you come back. I do annual blood work on everybody. This entire blood work panel, if you have insurance, like our Blue Cross Blue Shield, it's covered. If you pay out of pocket, it's $250 for the whole kit and caboodle. And I also do something called positive interviewing technique, which I really believe makes a difference. Patients call me by my first name. I really, truly believe I'm working for you. We're a team. And I never, ever say things like this disease is incurable. It's not. It's just we haven't been smart enough to figure it out yet. I don't say it's incurable. I say we're working really hard to figure it out. And that's true. So what am I measuring and why? Vitamin D, there is data that links in Parkinson's disease, low vitamin D, to constipation, inflammation, impaired balance and muscle weakness, depression, and dementia. In my practice, I do try and target blood levels of 60 to 80, and so your dose is going to depend on where you're starting from. The more skin you cover, the more fat you have on you. Vitamin D is stored in fat, and the more time you spend indoors, the higher your vitamin D dose is going to need to be to get you into the target range I'm looking for. Everyone's got a different opinion about the perfect dose, but I will say that you don't really have to worry about toxicity until you get up to about 300. And I love this picture here. I think this is such a nice visual of what a non-human primate, is up around these are nanomoles per liter, has about 170. This is a modern adult who's, working on a farm, surfing, actually goes outside. This is the average adult in North America, and then this is with vitamin D supplementation. Preventing dementia is something I work really hard to do. At the bottom, there's a study that says once you have dementia and you start chugging fish oil, it doesn't really make a difference. But over the course of your life, the higher your omega-3 fatty acid consumption, the less likely you are to develop dementia. So how much do you need and who needs it? I test people. You can measure someone's omega-3 fatty acid levels, and I've been doing that on everybody for the last couple of years now. There are a whole bunch of mechanisms by which omega-3 fatty acids improve neurological health. The other thing I like about fish oil, in addition to hopefully preventing dementia, is it works really well for dyskinesia. This study was done in 2006 in British Columbia, where they gave primates levodopa. They gave them Parkinson's, and then they gave them huge doses of levodopa until they got levodopa-induced dyskinesia. And then once the primates developed dyskinesia, they continued on with either the levodopa alone or levodopa plus fish oil. And you can see within 30 days, there was a 50% reduction in somebody's dyskinesia, the primate's dyskinesia. This has not been followed up in humans, and so I wanted to see if it would work. And so I found 2 people who had dyskinesia, pretty severe, and within the course of a month using this high DHA supplement, they had a 37 to 47% reduction of dyskinesia. These are big numbers that come from fish oil. High homocysteine levels. I think this is something that is unbelievably important to every one of you. So the way this works is homocysteine is something that we all have circulating in our bloodstream. It's a normal part of human metabolism. But when it goes up above a 12, 13, 14, it becomes neurotoxic. There are about 20 studies now that say the higher your homocysteine, the more likely you are to develop dementia. A study just came out from UK saying if we just gave people these B vitamins and lowered their homocysteine levels, they could save billions in healthcare costs. So this is not specific to Parkinson's disease, it's across the board, but what is very specific to Parkinson's disease is that levodopa raises your homocysteine. I love levodopa. I want you all on levodopa. This is not a reason to not be on levodopa. This means that if you are on levodopa, you have to get your blood levels checked once a year to make sure that your homocysteine levels are not creeping up into a dangerous level. I don't know how easy that blood work is to get here. Every one of my patients who is on levodopa gets an annual check for homocysteine. I believe that's part of good medicine. If you had cancer and I gave you a chemotherapy that caused nausea, I would treat your nausea too. That's part of the package. If I'm giving you a medicine that depletes your folic acid, it is my obligation to make sure that that's not hurting you downstream. A great review article just came out to September 2016, linking homocysteine elevations to Parkinson's dementia, saying L-DOPA-induced hyperhomocysteinemia. Could this be the elephant in the room? And and this is again, I don't have any connection with any of these products that I'm using as examples. I don't have any stock or ownership in any of them. This homocysteine factors product I think is excellent. I'd say it works for maybe 95% of people to lower homocysteine levels. It costs about $17 a month. We'll come back to this one in a minute. My slides got a little messed up. The other thing that I measure is inflammation, high sensitivity CRP. So what this blue line shows, what they did is they took people with Parkinson's disease and they measured how much inflammation do they have, and they just followed them for 4,000 days to find out, are they still alive? All things combined, doesn't matter what you died from, we just want to know, are you still alive 4,000 days later? So the people who had a high sensitivity CRP level, a measure of inflammation, that was below 0.8, 75% of them were still alive. For those who were above a 0.8, only 50% were still alive. So if you were to get that test and you were to find out, how do I lower it, what would you do? First thing I'd say is adipose tissue around your belly makes a lot of inflammation. If you have extra fat cells, lose them. And there is a substantial body of data saying that the more fruits, veggies, carotenoids, vitamin C, soy, and fish that you eat, the lower your inflammation. I also just presented a couple slides back. If you remember, vitamin D deficiency was associated with higher CRP. So these are all, keeping that down. Tools and tricks I use in clinic, constipation, I use probiotics. And I'll tell you, once you start eating 10 to 12 servings of fruits and veggies a day, constipation becomes much, much less of a problem. And so for those people who are, and the other thing too I'll talk about is drinking water. I don't think most people know this, but when we're talking about, oh, you've had this disease 10, 20 years, the way we know that is we've gone back, right? And we have these longitudinal prospective studies where we followed people, and we've actually found a subset of people who were constipated 18.8 years prior to their onset of Parkinson's. What's even more fascinating to me is at the time they were constipated, they were drinking less water. And here's what's even neater. They were less thirsty than their counterparts. So it's really tempting to say, oh, not drinking enough water leads to blah, 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 blah. But the reverse argument is maybe one of the earliest symptoms of Parkinson's is the inability to recognize thirst. And so this really is where I want you to be a lot more conscientious. I don't want you to drink water when you're thirsty. I want you to drink water because the human body needs water. And I like these ideas of, these ideas of, adding electrolytes. If you learned earlier, one of the recommendations for making your meds more available was to have a little acid in it. You saw that vitamin C was protective for some of these things a couple slides back. I will have a lot of my patients a couple times a day take one of those powdered vitamin C packets as an acid. It helps with your med availability. It's got some electrolytes in it, so instead of water just rinsing through your kidneys, making you run to the restroom all the time, that it actually provides some solute and minerals in there that is actually more rehydrating. So increasing water, certainly fruits and veggies, but probiotic supplements can be very useful. And here are two studies done in Parkinson's disease where people who failed dietary interventions were given a lactobacillus supplement and had improvement in bowel function. I like this nutrient a lot. This is called citicoline or CDP choline. And the reason I started studying it is because it is very important for keeping neuronal cell membrane integrity. And what happens is, if you take citicoline, it will turn to acetylcholine, which is a neurochemical required for learning and memory. And so if you get anyone with dementia, whether it's age-related dementia, Alzheimer's dementia, Parkinson's disease dementia, you have a deficiency of acetylcholine. So what happens is learning and memory is so important, that acetylcholine is so important. If you get low in it, you'll start stealing it from the cell. And then what happens is the cell membrane becomes vulnerable and unstable, and that sets up a huge cascade. So I started studying it along the lines of preventing dementia and providing stability to neurons. And then I learned that other people were actually studying it because citicoline increases dopamine receptor density on your cells. And so taking 2 to 4 caps per day actually is very effective at levodopa sparing. What will happen is if you're perfectly dosed, your meds are perfectly regulated, and you start taking citicoline, over the next 30 days, you will start to become over-medicated. And that's a signal to start decreasing your levodopa. And so in these studies, depending on 2 or 4 caps per day, people were able to reduce their levodopa dose 30 to 50%. Sleep and fatigue, we've talked a lot about that today. I actually added these slides in because my experience is melatonin is actually very effective at improving sleep. I will add that 3 milligrams I have never found to be very effective. I read a study a couple years ago that I've actually had a hard time finding, but said people with Parkinson's need 9 to 12 milligrams of melatonin to get the same benefits that non-Parkinson's people get at 3 milligrams. And when I read that and learned that and started using with my patients, it was a big game changer. Now, I find 9 to 12 milligrams very effective in improving sleep in Parkinson's. These studies show that it improved insomnia, it improved sleep, decreased in anxiety, improved quality of life, and there was another study in REM sleep behavior disorder. And as we heard earlier today, where some people prefer clonazepam, here's a study that actually did a head-to-head comparison between melatonin and clonazepam. And both groups had an improvement in their sleep disorder. On the PD sleep scale, melatonin actually worked a little bit better, but clonazepam was associated with greater daytime sleepiness the following day and had more cognitive side effects in terms of memory and cognitive impairment. So I absolutely prefer melatonin, and I like this idea of, you saw that you have a melatonin deficiency, right? You saw the slide today. It just makes more sense to me to give you melatonin, right? And you don't have a clonazepam deficiency is my point. And I am on board with whatever works. I'm not anti-pharmaceuticals. I want you to use whatever gets you a good night's sleep. But I do want you to use common sense, where if your brain doesn't have enough melatonin, it's neuroprotective, and melatonin improves sleep. Let's start there. And if you need to move to the big guns, let's do that. Light therapy, we talked about a little bit today. I have been having patients buy light boxes and use it first thing in the morning. Again, the higher the lux, the better. In theory, your truck headlights would work. You don't need to go buy a $400 light box, although that is probably a little more convenient and effective. And I do. They've done light therapy studies in Parkinson's disease, and they did see improvements in depression, motor scores, in tremor in particular. And this one study I found really surprising, that there was an improvement in slowness and rigidity, but not tremor. There was improved mood, sleep, decreased seborrhea, is that purple rash you get around your hairline, and improvement in impotence and appetite. And some people actually were able to reduce their Parkinson's meds with a light box. Cannabis, several people have asked me about, so I threw this slide in here. There are some really compelling YouTube videos about cannabis treating Parkinson's tremor. We did a study up in Seattle. We haven't published it yet, but we looked at 10 people with Parkinson's disease tremor, and we found that the people with the most significant tremor were helped by cannabis. But for people who just had a mild or moderate tremor, it did not affect tremor much. I published a paper recently saying this is not, in terms of the medical reasons why physicians can legally recommend it, anxiety and depression are not on the list, but when we surveyed 3,000 people around the world as to why they were using it, pain, anxiety, and depression were the 3 most common reasons that it is being used. I will tell you, I would say 30 to 40% of my patients use some form of cannabis, and the number one reason by far that people use it is actually not for any of these, but for sleep. People will tell me over and over, I would not be able to sleep without it. And that is not for everyone. Everyone treats, it responds really differently. So in summary, this is my final slide. You have 2 choices. We could perform triple bypass surgery, where we take a vein out of your thigh, open up your chest, sew the vein into your coronary artery. It costs more than $100,000, and it'll keep you laid up for about 2 months. Or we could put you on a vegan diet. A vegan diet? Gee, doc, that seems pretty extreme. Just because it's normal doesn't mean it's healthy, right? And so I really want you to rethink everything you're eating, who you're hanging out with. And for those of you who want to help us figure out the recipe for success, I've put little postcards on your card. We are still enrolling people. We're looking for up to 5,000 people to participate. It takes about an hour and a half twice a year. Internet-based, you don't have to do anything except tell us who you are, how you are, and what you're doing. And we've written code that tells us who are the success stories. Thank you.